All right, thank you, members. If Adam can confirm we're live, that's great. Okay, good evening and welcome to the Audit and Standards Committee meeting of Melton Borough Council. Members are reminded that we will be using the audio-visual system this evening, and the meeting will also be streamed live on YouTube. Members are asked physically to raise their hands in the usual way to indicate they wish to speak, and they may use their microphones when speaking for the benefit of all present. The microphone is live when the red light displays. Please switch mobile phones to silent, and I will now provide a reminder of the evacuation procedure, which, in the event of having to evacuate the council chamber, please leave by one of the 6 emergency exits around the sides of the council chamber, and please assemble at the far side of the front car park nearest the park entrance. And as we have a guest who is not usually at the council, officers will be on hand to help should you need that. Public recording of the meeting. There is legislation that allows the public to film, record, or use social media at the council meetings. This must not be disruptive to the good order of the meeting, nor include any filming or recording of the public seating area. Okay, so apologies for absence. Well, we've got apologies from Councillor Mason, and I believe Councillor Atherton, you're substituting for, or did she just come for the? Oh, she just came for the. In the last session of the. She's just a sub. That's fine. Okay, so we've got any other apologies for absence. Now, I haven't been advised by Councillor Lumley if he is or isn't attending. So, but if we just note he's not here at the moment, and I believe everybody else is in attendance. So, okay. And apart from Councillor Mason, he cannot be here tonight, but has put his apologies in as per the notes. Minutes for the 16th of January. So is there any questions or any points on the minutes, or can we confirm those as written? Councillor Carter?
Yes, Chair, I'm happy to move them.
And Councillor Mike Brown, second. All those in favour? That's unanimous. That's passed. Declarations of interest. Happy to invite members who wish to make any declarations of interest in respect to any items on the agenda for this meeting. I don't think there pretty much would be on this one. No. Okay. Thank you very much, members. Okay. Item 4. So the internal audit progress report. Rachel, being our chief internal auditor, will provide an introduction to the report. I'd like to ask members, as I've said before at previous meetings, we would like to open up with debate and have that quite fluid on there. I know many members have raised questions in a session that we've just had, which was pretty much a training session outside of this. But if there were any questions on that was raised in that meeting on any agenda items, please raise them. Feel free to raise them again in this meeting for the public's benefit, for those members who couldn't attend that session just before this meeting. So I'll hand over to Rachel, and then it's to note the progress made by internal audit. Rachel, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So as you've explained, this is the latest update on the delivery of this year's internal audit plan. So Appendix A is in the format that you will be familiar with as a committee, but I'll take you through some of the key sections. So there's a copy of the internal audit plan from page 19 of the papers this evening as Appendix 1. So this provides each of the assignments within this year's audit plan, the status of the audit as at the time of producing this report, and the outcomes of all of those which have been finalised. So since the last committee meeting, we had finalised 2 further audits, which are mentioned on page 19. So one of those is in relation to the Levelling Up Fund programme, and one in relation to Section 106 agreement. So the opinions are listed there. And then the full overview of the key findings is provided in section 2.5 of the paper from page 17. So the first was in relation to the Levelling Up Fund. So this was phase 1 of our assurance work in relation to this area. So we delivered this as a joint review, both with Melton and with Rutland, given the joint working on, on the programme. So this initial piece of work was intended to give some assurance around how the programme has been set up from a governance and financial management perspective, to make sure we have a robust arrangement in place for the delivery of the programme. So as you can see, we've given a good level of assurance, so substantial assurance, both for the control environment and the compliance element for this audit, which reflects the good levels of governance and financial reporting arrangements that have been established already. So no further recommendations to highlight for the committee in particular in relation to that review. The second audit is summarised on page 18 of your papers, which is in relation to section 106 monitoring. So this is an area where we did an audit back in 2019-20, which highlighted some actions for improvement in terms of the monitoring arrangements for section 106 monies. So we were revisiting it this year to look at the progress that had been made in designing some of these controls. So we were able to see good progress being made in a number of areas, and showing that the effective management of monitoring is being improved. What we have made recommendations around is formalising some of those documented processes and procedures. Sorry, I have a drink. To make sure that those are better formalised and then consistently applied going forwards. Because at the moment, whilst the processes have improved, without that formal documentation and procedures, we just want to make sure that they're fully embedded and consistently applied in the cases of any changes going forward. So in terms of the monitoring process, there are further steps that have been taken to further improve the proactive action that's being taken, both to monitor those trigger points, make sure we're clear on what monies have been recovered and when they need to be used by. So whilst we were able to see some improvement, again, we've made some recommendations where this can be further improved and strengthened. So one of the things we've recommended is the implementation of a Section 106 monitoring group. So this is where we would look to bring together key officers from a number of the service areas, which would support in bringing together that information, have that oversight, make sure we're clear on what money needs recovering, when it's due, and that we can then monitor how that's being used to avoid any clawback of monies. So during the audit, we didn't identify any cases where there had been clawbacks of monies, which is important to note, but what we obviously want to make sure that we're proactive in terms of those arrangements going forward. One of the other areas that we highlighted as well was improving the reporting to the senior leadership team to make sure there's that consistent oversight of the balances that are due, but also the balances that are held and need to be allocated as well. So on the basis of those findings, we've given a moderate assurance opinion, both for the control environment and the compliance, and a medium organisational impact. So I think it demonstrates the direction of travel in relation to the processes in that area. So just mentioning in terms of Appendix 1, again, some progress has been made in relation to a number of the audits since we produced these papers. So on page 19, the review of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund and the Rural England Prosperity Fund, that has now moved to draft report stage. We've also drafted the report on procurement compliance, and we've also in the finalising stages with the housing regulatory change review on page 20 as well, which is looking at the steps in place to manage the proactive preparation for those inspections. So also within the report is an update on the implementation of audit recommendations. So in Appendix 2 on page 23, there's an overview of the actions that were due and those that were implemented. Based on the feedback from this committee at the last meeting, we did take this away to senior leadership team. And there has been a focus on making sure that these actions are being progressed and that we receive timely updates. And that has resulted in a drop in the number of overdue actions, which I'm pleased to report from, I believe it was 36 at the last meeting, down to the 23 that we have this time. So we still have 2 actions which fall into the category of being high priority and over 3 months overdue, which are provided in Appendix 3 on page 24. With the latest updates in relation to each of those. I am pleased to say that the action that has been on the Audit Committee's agenda for some time in relation to the Intensive Housing Management Service, which was referred to as case management, has now been removed. That has now been closed as an audit action. We're satisfied that the action that had been taken had addressed the initial risk. So I'm pleased to report that's now no longer on this appendix. But obviously we will continue to follow up on those two that do remain outstanding. Just to mention on the business continuity action on page 24, the reference to LRF is the Local Resilience Forum, just to note that there's an acronym there that I was conscious hadn't been explained. And the only other thing to mention, we have in Appendix 4 on page 25 our latest feedback scores as well, which are very positive for the year, with the majority of feedback being of outstanding, which is obviously really pleasing to see in terms of our own performance. So just to reassure the committee that we do remain on track to deliver the audit plan. As I've said, we have really drafted reports on a number of those outstanding audits, and everything else is in hand for delivery for the end of March. So we will have all of those at final report stages for your next meeting to provide the annual assurance opinion and report. And that's a run through, Chair, of the key sections of the paper, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, and really comprehensive report. And I'd like to thank you for the work for the year since the new year of this committee as well. And I think from some of the engagement from committee members, as we were discussing just before the meeting, how that sort of gone into these reports and things have come off the risk registers and how they've been moving on. Just conscious that some members may have raised a few items which may relate to this. I'm going to open up with debate, but one thing I think is really, really important, and for the benefit of the public who may be watching this, obviously the Section 106 monitoring. Section 106 is funding from planning and development. We all see on a lot of social media platforms, or just as we debate with members of the public, when housing development in particular comes through, people are always saying to the planning authority or to us as members, well, we need the infrastructure, we need the doctors' surgeries, we need the road, we need schools, and all those civic amenities that help build a community. And this is the part where this audit committee needs to hold the council, I think, to account. It's not all just to this council, though, would it be, Rachel? Am I fair in saying that? Because obviously some Section 106 goes to other authorities. So, for example, well, if you're going to come in, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so to confirm, we do collect some Section 106 monies, which we then transport over to the County Council as well, with the County Council services. For the purpose of this, we obviously focus on those which are retained by Melton Borough Council to make sure those are tracked and monitored as well.
Thank you. And yeah, I mean, there have been a lot of change, and I think, as you were saying, the year of this was going back to 2019. Did you say, Rachel? Did I pick that up in your report update?
Yes, Chair. So the last audit that we did on Section 106 monitoring was in 2019-20. So this audit was intended to follow up on the progress that had been made since then.
Okay, thank you. And what I think is certainly happening is what I can see, and without a doubt members of the public can see, a lot of houses have now been completed. So a lot of Section 106, I would have thought, is now due or has been due, and that hopefully will go into those amenities which Section 106 is for. So I think it's absolutely vital, because I think as a council, and not just as the planning authority, Section 106 is what really defines a district or a borough council, of what impact it can have in creating communities for the people that we serve and we represent. So on a personal level, this is just my own personal view, I see this as a really important one, because if we cannot affect the change through Section 106, it really diminishes what the council does. So it's really good and heartening to see some of the how this report's worked through and some of the improvements you've referenced. A lot of members have mentioned Levelling Up Fund over the last year, so I won't go into that, but I'll let you guys debate that one, which probably will go to Melise. And if there's any other hands up, we'll go straight to that. So I'll go to Melise if it is the Levelling Up.
Mr. Chairman, it wasn't really the Levelling Up Fund particularly, but although I wonder how up to date the report is with all the rumours that are going on, I was basically going to agree with you about the Section 106 monitoring group. And I can tell you, not because of social media, which I never follow and haven't seen, so it was purely picking up through the minutes. I would like to see councillor representation on that committee. I was someone who was in charge of finance or planning or leader, would that be feasible?
So I think what you are referring to, Councillor Graham, is the Section 106 monitoring group, which is one of the recommendations as part of the audit. That is an officers group internally to for us to get a grip, and for the recommendation is for that group to report one to the senior leadership team. So again at officer level, but also add performance indicators as part of the performance framework, so that it gets reported to the cabinet and council at the agreed level of interval. So members will get reported because until now we haven't got those performance indicators being reported to the members currently. But with these recommendations and the work we are currently doing, that information will be reported to members through cabinet and council, council on annual basis, cabinet on quarterly basis. So you will get that information. So I don't know which committee you are referring to, because it's just an internal officers working group.
But I fully understand it is, but it's also a political group in a way, and I would like to feel that the leader or someone like that was actually ex officio on that group, so they could actually keep an eye on it.
Yeah.
As it meets.
Just coming on that, I think we're, as Louise is saying as well, is it could be any one of the portfolio holders, could be Councillor Butcher's growth and regeneration portfolio, or the leader or whoever there. And I think what Louise is saying is just that oversight of, so while there is an officer forum, what's the engagement to an accountable cabinet member, if we take the names out, but just a cabinet member who's then responsible back to full council, that it's, and I know that would happen in a cabinet system, but obviously some of us have worked in the cabinet system, and so if that request is coming in, it's how is that communicated back to council, and is a councillor accountable, I think is where it's coming from.
Just to come in here, I mean, obviously the reporting back is appropriate to report back to the portfolio holder on how we're doing in terms of collecting Section 106 monies. But I think in terms of a detailed officer group that's looking at when Section 106 monies are due, have they been collected, what account have they been put into, have they been used on the right area? That's really detailed officer stuff, and I don't think it would be appropriate for a member to sit in what is an actual operational activity, really. There's all sorts of operational activities like that where we track money and whether it's coming in. I think that would be not necessarily appropriate.
And my other question was business continuity. Is that a new post, manager?
It's a new shared post for the Leicestershire and Rutland Resilience Forum. So obviously at the moment, I don't know if you're aware that we do have a partnership there around emergency planning, and what this is doing is saying that all councils have an issue with business continuity as well. So it's an extension of that partnership to bring in business continuity support across the various councils as well.
Half a post, or?
It's less than half. I'm not sure. It's almost a third, I think. Is it something like a third, I think, or even less?
Right. Thank you very much, Tim.
No other questions on the Section 106. Would we be able to have that one updated again, but not to either the committee or chair, vice chair, just how that's progressing? Because I think, as Millie said, all three are on amber, but it is that where it says in the report, the lack of formalised coordination, and just sort of that's coming into place. Or
so from an internal audit perspective, obviously we don't have Section 106 on next year's audit plan, so we wouldn't really be in a position to report back, because we can only report back if we've reperformed testing. But you could always, of course, ask for an update from officers on progress that's being made against the action plan if that was helpful to the committee.
I will report continually, but only I sort of just have a quick little report. Yep.
Okay, so Pranali, I'll give you an action on that one then, if that's okay. If Adam can, if you could update the audit committee, what, 6 months from 6 months? How that is, just a very brief update of from there. Mike?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's a question I think I've raised on previous reports, so in the same vein. So on section 106, to distill down what you're saying here, it was recognised there were issues. A range of measures have been taken to improve that process, and the recent audit has noted that some improvements have been made, but further action is required, which leads to the assessment of assurance at the bottom of that section. At what point will it be appropriate to revisit to see how much further this has been taken? Because what we'd like to see is the assurance moves from moderate to good. But clearly that's not going to happen next month. So it's just an assurance that this will be revisited in an appropriate timescale to see what further changes have been made.
I mean, I think as already has been said, we can, you've got your recommendation tracking anyway, but in terms of a further review, then they would need to provide for that in the audit plan. Obviously, it's not in the 24-25 plan, so you could have it if members wished as an early part of 25-26, which would give, just over 12 months, which would probably be around the right time scale.
Because I therefore request that's logged as being part of the next year's plan.
On that, would you be comfortable if the officers could sort of work out a time what they think would need to do that, and then come back, and then either to Jim and myself, we could liaise back with the committee to say this is how much time for this particular work, and then would we be able to do that, Clive? We don't need a formal thing from the committee, do we?
No, you can hear back at any time on something like that, and obviously then the action will take.
Sorry, I should have said you can hear back on that at any time, and then if you decide that further action's appropriate, that can be considered then.
Okay, so we'll add up an action to Rachel and Dawn on that to devise how much time maybe for the next year would be required, and whether we need to up it or reduce it or whatever, and then obviously Pranali and her team to still give that update to audit and standards in 6 months' time, which probably would be, if we say around about the September meeting. If we could document that, and if there's any other questions, Ian.
So thank you, Chair. I've got a question relating to Appendix 1, the table on the second page of the table. The supporting vulnerable people line shows a significant overspend against the budget of approximately 40%. I'd just like to understand what caused that overspend, how kind of what measures were taken to mitigate the overspend, and whether any action was taken or not to re-baseline the budget to more closely represent the 25 days spent rather than the 18 days budgeted for. 40% to me as a project manager is a significant overspend, and I would have expected that to have been flagged up somewhere.
To you, Chair. So obviously the budgets are set at the time of audit planning based on the initial scope that we intend to cover. So with this particular review, it was the first time we'd undertaken this audit, and it was actually a really large audit. So it was quite challenging in terms of the scope, and we wanted to make sure that we covered all of the key areas. And as we hadn't had any previous coverage, we were starting from scratch in terms of the audit. So just to note as a committee, when you do have an overspend in terms of the audit days, that's not actually costing the council or the committee any additional audit costs. It's for me to cover within my shared service. So We obviously try to balance that out where we can. There have been a couple of audits that have come in lower than expected. So environmental health and the supporting vulnerable people were actually both delivered by also supervised by the same auditor. And as you can see, there was an underspend on the environmental health, but an increase on the supporting vulnerable people. So given the scope and the number of points that we wanted to cover, we decided to actually up the number of days on that review to get the assurance we wanted to get. Yeah. So hopefully that gives some context.
Thank you. Sorry, Steve. That's 2 meetings on the trot there. Belize, would you like to propose that? For the section 106, the actions we've put on section 106.
So I propose that we have a 6-monthly update report that to the Audit and Standards Committee on section 106 and how it's proceeding. Yeah.
And for Mike's suggestion for Rachel and Dawn to come up with a plan to keep the section 106 update, the chair, vice chair, who will in turn update the committee to make sure that the number of days for the 2024-25 plan, 25-26 plan, my life, time runs away, doesn't it?
You put it into words,
Yeah.
I'll propose it.
Yeah. So I think we got mentioned that earlier. Adam, are you okay with those 2 recommendations? Yeah, thank you. And Mike, would you be happy to second those?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you, members. So item 5. Okay, so over to Rachel again. Here we do have some recommendations on this one, so I will leave it until Rachel finishes her presentation, and then if we can ask some questions. The recommendations are there on 212223. If there are any questions or amendments, please let me know through the debate. Rachel, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So under the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards, it is for the Audit Committee to review and approve the Internal Audit Plan, which essentially sets out the programme of work that Internal Audit will deliver during that financial year. So that's the purpose of this paper this evening. So the covering report provides a bit of an overview of the process that we followed to develop the draft audit plan that we bring to you today, and also to introduce the internal audit charter and strategy, which we've also produced within this paper. So I have talked through with the committee previously the process for developing the internal audit plan to make sure that we end up with a risk-based audit plan that adds value to the organisation and meets the assurance requirements of management and of officers and this audit committee as well. So essentially, we've developed the plan based on the Council's corporate risk register. We've looked at the directorate level risk registers. I've discussed the risk areas, both current and emerging risks with all of the directors. We've looked at the audit universe of areas where it may not feature high on the risk radar, but actually it's an area where we need ongoing rolling assurance. And we've fed all of these things into a potential list of areas for consideration in the audit plan, and then gone through essentially a risk assessment process to identify which ones would be of most value in 2024-25. So the most important part of the report in terms of the audit plan starts on page 37, which is table 1. So this sets out the draft internal audit plan that I'm bringing to you today. So I don't intend to go through each of the audit assignments line by line, but essentially these are, as I say, are based on the Council's risks. We've referenced the risk entries, which you can match the strategic risk register or the directorate risk register as appropriate, the corporate objectives and the initial timing that we intend to apply to the delivery of the audit. So just a couple that I'll draw to the committee's attention in particular. So we've talked today about the Levelling Up Fund. We have a line for this again in next year's audit plan because I think we need to continue to follow this and continue to give assurance. Whilst, as I mentioned, the review that we delivered this year was delivered as a joint review with Rutland County Council because it was very much around the groundwork and the governance arrangements for the entire programme. Going forward, I think we will be doing more Melton Borough specific audit coverage to look directly at the projects that you're actually delivering within this programme, looking at how those are being managed and how we're managing the associated risks. So that's how I tend to approach that first one. On the growth and regeneration block. The next around the building control partnership, just to note as well, we're also intended to deliver this one potentially as a joint review with Harborough District Council, who I also work with, who are also part of that partnership. So hopefully we can gain some efficiencies through delivering that audit for both councils at the same time. Some of the others to mention, we have a review on page 38 around the social housing regulatory change. So we intend to deliver this as 2 phases. The first will be around the knowing your stock element, and the other around knowing your tenants. So we'll deliver those as 2 separate audits during the year. So the audit that we've delivered in this current year's audit plan was more around the readiness for the new regulations, whereas next year we're intending to more look at the compliance and how we evidence that we're up to speed with those regulations. We also, just to mention as well, under that the housing repairs and housing voids targeted follow-up review. So this was something that came from one of the committee requests at a previous meeting when we brought the report on housing voids, and it was requested that we do some follow-up work. So hopefully the committee is pleased to note that that has made it onto next year's audit plan. And also the review around housing allocations and homelessness, which again is an area that we had discussed at the committee meeting as an area to include in future coverage. So I'm happy to take questions on any of the other areas that are proposed within the plan, whether that be why it's on here or what we plan to get from the audit in terms of assurance. Just to mention, we've also on page 40 of the papers included a reserve list table. So these are some of the areas that were also highlighted through that audit planning process, but didn't quite make it onto the cut of the draft audit plan. But it gives us an opportunity to reevaluate that throughout the year if we need to, and reprioritise them if the risk environment changes. And we will also, of course, feed these into the 2025-26 audit planning if it doesn't get covered during the current financial year. And then just to mention again, as Appendix B from page 41 of the papers, you also have the internal audit charter and strategy. Now, this is a document that, again, under the public sector internal audit standards, the audit committee is required to review on an annual basis and formally approve. And members may recall that I brought this at the equivalent meeting this time last year with some amendments from the previous version. This time, again, we have reviewed it, but I don't propose any changes to the internal audit charter this year. Essentially, we will continue to deliver your internal audit service in the same way and to the same frameworks that we have over the last 12 months. So again, I'm happy to go through any of the details within that document further if members of the committee have any questions, but essentially we're not proposing any changes from the document that you approved this time last year. So that's an overview of the papers. So there are 3 recommendations, one to approve the plan. Just to mention, the second was around approving delegated authority for the Section 151 officer to approve changes to the plan in consultation with the chair of this committee. Just to explain that that's something that we do include every time we bring the audit plan. It's not anything new, but it just gives us that opportunity to be able to respond to changes in risk during the year if we need to, between audit committee meetings, if there was a change in the risk environment and something we felt we needed to deliver audit assurance work on. We wouldn't be waiting for the next audit committee to be able to make that amendment to the plan. But just to reassure members, if any such changes were made between meetings, that would be fully reported at the subsequent meeting within the internal audit update. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair, but that's a run through of that paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Before I go to members, I know a large part of the report, but also your commentary there was obviously around housing for public and private sector housing. There's been a lot of changes in either government policy or obviously with monetary policy as well, in which seems to have either been a catalyst for putting pressure, especially on the social housing sector, but also you could argue with the private rented sector as well, because obviously I don't know what the details are for Melton specifically, but nationally is there are less houses available to rent. There are more people requiring houses to rent, which is then supply demand. Rents are going significantly through the roof, and that report came through, I think, last week as well. That, I think, is going to put a significant pressure on the council, which in a risk terms management of, obviously we've got voids, health and safety checks, all the other stuff. What would you say this may affect the plan going forward in a year if all of a sudden we have a significant increase in people trying to find homes for rent, either socially or privately, and then the council trying to comply with its own duties for homelessness, but also to making sure its own stock is of a level where it's, because sometimes if you've got a house that's vacant, it can be a very worthy kind of feeling that you want to put a roof over somebody's head. But if the house isn't ready, there's going to be those pressures as well. So I can foresee difficulties for all councils, but what about this council? And in terms of a risk-based approach for your audit for next year, how would you see that working?
So in terms of the audits, as you say, we're covering this off from both angles, and we're conscious of the changes in a number of regulations and the additional pressures that will present under the circumstances. So we have a section on private sector housing on page 37, as well as our own housing, which is covered more on page 38. And I must say we have got quite a housing heavy audit plan this year, but I think that's because there's a lot going on, as you say, is an increasing risk area, and I think that's reflected in here. So I think the risk of that increased demand is hopefully covered off both with the review that we're doing on the housing allocations and homelessness applications, where we are looking at, if we are getting increasing numbers, are we making sure we're still applying the right policy and the right process consistently to ensure those are fairly managed. The voids process obviously again supports us in getting quicker turnaround of properties, as you say, so we need to make sure they're up to scratch before they are re-let. So I think hopefully the mixture of assurances that we're giving in those areas will help to give some assurance on that risk environment. Likewise with the private sector housing, again, this is a review that we are delivering at a number of councils that I work with at the moment, because it has come up the radar with the new rating system requirements. That's obviously dealt with by a separate team, so it's not within the housing team, but we'll obviously be looking at the processes there as well. And again, as you say, if there's an increased demand on need for these houses, again, that's likely to increase the risk environment. So I think that's why we have ended up with quite a housing heavy audit plan this year, and we have talked that through with the senior leadership team to make sure it is okay and we can manage that. But I think hopefully we've got the right level of coverage and assurance within the plan.
If I can come back in terms of, in my opinion, vast majority of private sector landlords, while I am one, so I will declare that interest, do provide a service. If there's such pressure, what I worry about is those rogue landlords who are not meeting their legal obligations, and for example, that can cause other issues which are antisocial, can spark in antisocial behaviour, crime, and then that becomes other factors for services that this council provides, as well as our partners in terms of the police, healthcare parties, and also the county council for vulnerable adults and vulnerable children. Equally, on the social housing side, we can find where there becomes hotspots, and I know ward councillors have probably have those patches in their own part. We won't go into that, but then it starts becoming a risk issue for the resources of the council if it's not managed effectively right from the start. Because I think from experience as a ward councillor, once you start having a community or a neighbourhood or a street starting to fall apart, it then escalates very, very quickly, and it starts dragging more and more resources from the council and other services. So obviously the audit's there to manage the processes we've got in place, but obviously the council and public services only have a finite resource, and if it all comes all at once, how does the council flag that to other authorities, namely the government or somebody else, because it can hit the bottom line, especially homelessness as well. That comes off the general fund, so all local taxpayers pay for that, and then it can push councils, as we've seen with other councils, into difficulties with their finances. I'm not going to say bankruptcy or anything like that, but it will all add pressure on there if this section isn't managed effectively, I would suggest. Over to you.
Yes, I completely agree. And I think that's why we need the focus on those areas. And I think if we were to find any issues, that's the recognition we need to give as to what the wider risks are. So it's not just a case of not applying a policy correctly. There are wider implications, there's wider risks. So I think that's taken into consideration, which is why we've reached the audit plan that we have. So hopefully this will give the audit committee the assurances they need in relation to the management of those risks.
Yeah, it's really continuing on, and it always happens now. I lose the vital bit on the thing, turns itself off. But it was about the private housing sector. We've delegated the internal audit to a different team within the same cost. And what does that team do for the private sector? Yeah, I think you said, but when I will go back, but we're looking for mold, and it always turns itself off just at the vital moment. Here we are. To provide assurance over the council compliance with regulations and council policy, and working with owners, landlords, letting agents, and tenants, to include review of compliance with the latest housing health and safety rating. And I think, if I understand it correctly, if you've got a team that are fulfilling that, or are you fulfilling that?
Through you, Chair. So that's all delivered by council services. So we would have a team that deal with that within the regulatory services, I believe. So Pranali might be able to comment on that. And usually they would be responsible for doing proactive interventions, anything within that area with private sector housing, engaging with landlords and applying these health and safety rating systems to any issues that come in around people. For example, if they have an issue with damp and mold in their property, there are ratings that they must apply as to what intervention they should engage with.
Are we waiting for them to contact us? For a tenant to contact the council and say, I've got mold? We're not doing spot checks, are we? Or are we?
Probably more for Pranali to answer that one, I think.
So currently, no, we are not. We don't have a dedicated private sector housing resource within the team just yet. But as part of the budget process, we have just approved one new post for private sector housing in response to the new legislation changes. So once recruited, we will have that ability, and hopefully we will be able to do some more proactive work with the landlords. But until now, it is about meeting the regulatory compliance on reactive basis as and when issues are raised with us.
Mr. Chairman, would it be worthwhile leaving this item on for another year and see how the man does, what the person does in post?
So through you, so obviously it is on the 24-25 audit plan. So we will be delivering this audit, and we have put it in for Q4 because in discussions with Pranali, we were aware of the appointment that was being made. So we want to give plenty of time. We're giving 3/4 of the year for them to get into post, get processes underway, and then we will come in and give any recommendations around how those processes could be improved around the end of the next financial year. So that has already been factored in.
Just before I bring you in, Mike, just on that as well with officers, what I think the money saving expert Martin Lewis has done, but there's been lots of studies. We've had an incredibly damp, wet year, and people dry their clothes inside because it's been really difficult to dry your clothes outside. There's been some really good studies where of dehumidifiers. One, it's cheaper to run than putting the heating on to dry your clothes, and it takes the water out of the air, but it's also that education of how moisture goes around a household and all the other stuff. But sometimes it's cost effective for landlords, private or public sector, to put in dehumidifiers, because some people who also have respiratory ailments, it can help there as well. So it can have that other benefit, and the running cost is relatively minimal than putting heating on, as I understand. But I'll leave other people to review what people like Martin Lewis and various other people have done. But that's just a word of maybe the council could look at that as well, but not really for Audit to step in on. But Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid it's me being a bit pedantic about the use of words, and it's on the item on the work programme under rent arrears, and it's just trying to reconcile the use of two words because, yeah, I'd stand to be corrected, but I doubt if there's been a single year in the history of this council or any other council where there's been a complete recovery of all arrears of rent for a whole range of reasons. But this item says to provide assurance over the controls in place to ensure the timely and complete recovery of housing rents. And I'm afraid in my mind, you're setting it up to fail because you can't actually have a system. So I just wondered about tweaking that wording, that we want a system that is as effective as it is possible to be in recovering arrears of rent, because clearly that's our objective. But we're never going to get above moderate on a system that actually says we've got to have complete recovery, because it's never going to happen.
Would you support cost effective? Because when you're recovering debt, I always find there's a cost effective cutoff. So, you know, young debt's easier to get to reduce, but once it goes over a certain particular time, you could spend more and more money trying to recover the debt, and you're probably not going to get it, or you get a penny in a pound. But if you tackle it early enough, and I think that's probably where this is going, you can try and get 99p of the pound before it gets to an aged debt. But Rachel, I don't know. Would you support that word? Sorry, Mark. Yeah.
I mean, I understand what you're saying, Chair. I mean, I also understand we don't want to send out a message saying, well, we're only half-hearted about this. So I think it's just if it said to ensure the timely recovery of housing rents, including arrears, without the use of the word complete, that would be a realistic thing, but it would be making it clear that we want a system that recovers all the arrears.
Through you, Chair, I think I'm happy to amend the wording for that purpose if the committee's minded to do so. I think in terms of this, I think rather than suggesting we were expecting complete recovery of every housing rent, I think it's more rather than a partial recovery of each rent. I think on a case-by-case basis, we want to be sure that we're recovering as the full amount rather than a bit of it, I suppose. So we weren't necessarily saying complete in terms of the whole list of all housing rents, but on a case-by-case individual basis, we want to seek complete recovery rather than a partial recovery, if that makes sense. So, but I'm happy to change the wording for the purposes of the plan, if that helps.
Any comments or objections to what Mike's put there? No. Well, we'll go with that. Any other questions at all, or can I? This is a recommendation, so I can seek a proposer and a seconder. Melise propose in first, second. All those in favour? And that's unanimous. Thank you again, members. Okay, moving on to the external audit plan, which I understand is an honour as a chair to say those words, which I was kindly introduced to Helen Lillington. I hope I pronounced your surname correctly there, Helen, by Dawn earlier. So Helen is from our new external auditors. Just before the meeting, we were talking about external auditors. There may be some questions that members may have. I'm happy to promote that open debate or any questions we've had, because I don't think this committee has seen the external auditor at the meeting before. So Helen, over to you and welcome.
Okay, thanks, Chair, and thanks for that lovely warm welcome. Lovely to be here tonight, as the Chair says. I'm from Grant Thornton, and we've been appointed under the PSAA contract as your auditors for 23-24 onwards. So I'm here tonight. I've got actually two papers on the agenda. The first being the audit plan, and also there's a document on there called Informing the Audit Risk Assessment. I'm just going to take them in reverse order, if that's all right, Chair, from what they're actually printed, and I shall explain why. So page 83 of your papers is the first one, which is a report we call Informing the Audit Risk Assessment. And that is a document that we send out to officers with, as you will see, a whole range of different questions. And the reason we do that is because the auditing standards require us to ask very specific questions of those key areas. So we get a really deep understanding of you as an organisation, and that enables us to then pinpoint the risks, and it helps us to formulate our view in terms of coming up with an audit plan. So that's why I'm keen to discuss that first before I actually take you through the audit plan. And we can do that. The standards don't prescribe us doing it in any particular way. As a firm, we found that this approach works better because actually what it does is it enables you as members again to have oversight of what those arrangements are. And the standards also require you as members to confirm that what is written there is your understanding of some of those controls as well. So I'm not proposing to go through it in huge amounts of detail because I realise it's a long document. I'm taking it as read that you have read the report. You will notice that we haven't been able to get the responses to some of the legal questions that are in there, but we were very keen for you to see this alongside the audit plan that we've presented, with a view that we'll update those when we've had the necessary responses. So I'm going to pause at that point to allow any questions or any debate, Chair.
Okay, I'm not going to call members individually, so if you just want to raise your hand and then just ask the question straight away. Any questions at all? No? Well, back to you. Was that a question? Oh, okay. I was, you could tell I was really eager there. Yeah. Tim, being an auctioneer, knows what it's like when someone raises a hand. So, Helen, back to yourself.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So we go through that process as I've described to get a feel for the council and to take us forward then in terms of the audit plan. So the audit plan then starts on what I believe is your page 59, and I'm navigating now, hopefully, to get to the same place. Yeah, so the audit plan then starts on page 59, and I'm conscious that you might not have seen an external audit plan for a little while, but this follows a pretty standard format. There is a lot of stuff in there that we are required, again, under auditing standards to inform you of, and that is why the format of the report is as it is. Again, you'll be pleased to hear I'm not planning to take you through this page by page. I'm just going to pick out the sort of key highlights for you, really. So in terms of where we are currently, this is the audit plan for the 23-24 financial statements. We are aware that the opinions are yet to be issued for the years before that. I'm sure members are aware of the various consultations that are in place in terms of proposals to deal with prior years that are not currently signed off. And I'm happy to take questions on that, but I don't, at the moment, don't want to detract from the fact that we're really keen to move forward for 23-24 and do the work that we need to do. So the key things really to discuss is as part of the audit plan, we will come up with a number of what we call significant risks. And those are the risks that we consider require special audit attention. Now, we take you through those from page 65 onwards. So some of those significant risks are effectively mandated by the auditing standards. So the first one that we talk about is risk of fraud in revenue recognition and expenditure. And that is a risk that we are specifically required to consider under the standards. And you will see that in relation to revenue recognition, we have considered your revenue streams, and we don't consider that to be a significant risk, and we are allowed to rebut that under the standards. Equally, we're required to consider the same on the expenditure side. And it's slightly different, but it's a nuanced wording, if you like. Again, there could be potential for manipulating expenditure, and generally what we see in the sectors is there is more of a risk around that than there is around income. But again, we don't consider that so significant that we're calling it a significant risk. That doesn't mean to say we're not going to do any work on it. We will still do a significant amount of work on both the revenue streams and the expenditure streams, and those are detailed in that last column on the page. The other risk that we're required to consider and is mandated in the standard is management override of controls. And we have no wriggle room, if you like, to be able to rebut that. You will see that on pretty much every audit plan. And that recognises that despite every control environment you have in place, there could still be a risk that those controls are being overridden. And to respond to that, we will spend a lot of time reviewing journal entries, because that is one of the key ways that accounts could be manipulated if that was happening. We also focus in very much on any elements of judgment or where estimation techniques have been applied, and understand the accounting policies that you have in place at the council. So that's how we respond to that risk. The others then that you see on the plan are very much risks that we have identified as part of our planning, but again, not dissimilar from what you would see in any other council. So again, you will probably not be surprised to hear that evaluation of land and buildings, council dwellings and investment properties features as a significant risk. And the key reason for that really is, again, because it is such a significant number in the accounts, and it is one that is open to an element of estimation and judgment. And again, that's one that we will spend a good amount of time on in terms of focusing in on that. So you'll see that across the range of properties as well. So just being aware of that. The other area that we consider a significant risk is around the pension fund, and for a very similar reason. It's open to estimation techniques. You will have an actuary involved in it. So again, focusing in very much on those areas that are probably more subjective in terms of significant risks. So
on the pension fund, which is run by the county council, what part can you play from the sidelines, really? They've got an actuary. It's quite I was on the pension board for quite a long time. It's a pretty complicated sort of world. How can you influence or report on that?
So again, in terms of, as you say, pensions is a complicated world, and we recognise that you are not the administrative body, and as you say, we will write to the auditors of that particular pension fund. But as an authority, you have a duty to understand how those estimates have been made, what inputs have gone in, has the right data been supplied to the actuary for them to be able to make the necessary calculations, has the actuary used the right assumptions. So we are coming in and we are checking, if you like, the sort of source data going in conjunction with what the pension fund auditor is doing. So it's very much a sort of two-pronged view. So the pension fund auditor will look at it from the pension fund side, and we will look at the data that you have supplied here to them to enable them to form their judgment.
So you and I can't remember how many district councils we got in Leicestershire, and I think it's Rutland as well, but 6 are all doing this. Can we not combine and get one auditor to check that it's all above board, rather than every individual going along?
So the pension fund auditor will do it on behalf of all of the bodies, if you like yourselves, where we will write to them. So if we are the auditors of a number of bodies, we will tend to just send one request to the actuary so that it covers that. From the pension fund point of view, I'll pretend I have been a pension fund auditor in the past, and again, you will do that once. So you will you will do the assumptions, you will check that with a mind to the fact that you might need it for, you know, 3 or 4 different auditors. So that sits very firmly with the pension fund auditor. In terms of what we do from your side, if you like, you know, your data will be unique. And so that's the bit that we will specifically focus on and specifically check. And equally, the questions we ask of management and the finance team is, how have you assured yourself that the actuary has done all the, you know, that the pension fund has spoken to the actuary and they have got all the right information? Because again, it's management's duty to make sure that they understand that estimate that is coming back, because the numbers that come back from the actuary are ultimately an estimate. So it's just understanding how those bits sort of fit together. Does that help?
Slightly, I look at Dawn, is that what we do, or do we just take the word from the pension fund in the way? But it's terribly hard to check what your actuary is already. The actuary is a professional who's come up. You've
Yeah,
got to trust him, haven't you?
it is quite difficult. I mean, I suppose our involvement with pension is not just in terms of the statement of accounts. It will be, I think, particularly at the triennial valuation and what assumptions they're making at that time around life expectancy, etc. And our history of early retirements or those sorts of things. So we would scrutinise it really heavily then, because that dictates what contribution we're making to the fund. And then for me, I think probably the most important thing is when we get those reports from the actuary is we have, you know, choices about the level of detail that we get on those reports, and also as well how we then insert those into the accounts as well, because we could get that report and then make a mistake when we're actually putting them into the account. But I do agree with you, you know, they are the experts, so it is quite difficult to actually you know, but I think a lot of that scrutiny is probably done earlier than just at that point. If that makes sense.
Shall I continue? Okay. So the sticky issue of pensions aside, so that covers the sort of what we call the significant risks, and just to be really clear, those are the areas that will have more audit focus than other areas. We will obviously look at all of the material balances within the accounts, but in terms of what we need to report to you as those charged with governance, those are the sort of really key issues. I've talked about materiality, and you will see that materiality is set out on pages 70. You'll see we've set at this stage at planning, we've set it at 468k, and that equates to around 1.6% of your draft gross expenditure. And then we will set a lower level of materiality for senior officer remuneration, because we consider that to be an area that is sensitive and more open to, well, people might generally be more interested in those. So we'll set a lower level of materiality to make sure that we cover that as part of the audit. So a key part of the audit is in terms of how we actually look at the systems that drive the numbers in the financial statements. And again, under what is called ISO 315, one of our standards, we need to be really clear we understand the operations of the IT systems that actually form the basis of those accounts. So we will undertake some work around the general IT controls to make sure we understand those, and we will take those in terms of what we consider those key systems, which are outlined on page 72. So that gives you a really sort of broad overview of what we do in terms of the financial statement audit, which is the audit that we deliver an opinion on, all being well, at the end of the process. Obviously, the second part of the work that we do is our value for money conclusion, which results in the auditor's annual report. And our work is quite in early stages, I think it's fair to say, in terms of that value for money arrangements. We do undertake a high level risk assessment at this point. We haven't identified any what we call risks of significant weaknesses in terms of the planning, but I am keen to see what the predecessor auditors are going to report around this before we conclude our planning. So at the moment, very much from everything we know so far, we are not considering any significant weaknesses. But again, we will update that as things finalise. So you've got there a little bit of a timeline. It's really pleasing that we've been able to come in and do the planning and the risk assessment in line with the timescales that we wanted to do. Equally, we've actually been able to undertake a little bit more of the planning than we anticipated. So we've actually started to do some interim testing that will actually hopefully take the pressure off some of the final accounts audit later on. So tonight, as it says on the timeline, you've got the audit plan. We are currently planning for the year-end audit to be October to December, with draft audit findings report and the auditor's annual report at the end of the year. And again, that recognises that we need to be really clear about what is happening in terms of your opening balances for 23-24. And as you will probably be aware, there is still not clarity around that. So until we have that clarity, I think it makes most sense for us to schedule it in what we're calling in our phase 2 of the audits. That's not to say we can't revisit it as the year goes on, but I think at the moment that's where we're planning it to be. So that's all really in terms of the highlights that I wanted to go through. The rest is what I would call pretty standard stuff in terms of the just various things that were required to report to you. But I think those are the bits that probably require the most sort of discussion, but I'm obviously happy to take any further questions, Chair.
Just one, value for money. My bet noir, and I know I'm going to lose it, is working from home. Is it something that you would look into under value for money?
Not necessarily, and I would probably say highly unlikely. I think the term that we use when we talk about value for money is possibly slightly misleading, because what we're actually doing is we're making a commentary on arrangements, and the commentary on arrangements is broadly in three areas. So if you think about financial sustainability is one of those areas. So what is the budget looking like? What are the reserves looking like? How is that position looking going forward? We're talking about governance. So how does the council operate? How does it make decisions? Is the second one. And then the third one is what we call the 3 E's, your economy, efficiency and your effectiveness. And that covers largely partnership working, and you know, how you are driving your strategy and how you are monitoring that strategy. So if within that there was a particular problem, it feels like it's more of a 3 E's type question. If home working came up as a part of a risk assessment where it suggested there was a really significant issue and it was forming a barrier maybe for you achieving your objectives, then it might be something that we'd comment on, but I would say that that would be unusual just because of the nature of the work that the value for money arrangements requires us to look at.
No other questions at the moment. I had a question before, way before this meeting, and it was from a member who's doesn't serve on the committee, and I think really just for the publicity to members and wider members. So when we had this previously with our meeting with Dawn and Rachel just before this formal meeting, but if a member has an issue that they're worried about that they're not being listened to, or they've raised something that they feel has either been rejected, can they come to you? And one thing, this is just a personal part from what James, who's my vice chair, and myself have said. We've said to all members, if they want to raise something direct with either myself or James Mason as well, they're more than happy. We're more than happy to listen to that, to raise that to where we need to, because what we don't want is, I think, as you just rightly said, is how things are missed, and I don't want to make any speculation or anything, but sometimes a member has spotted or seen something that they're concerned about. Now, it's not always appropriate to go to the external auditor, but I think what we have said to you before the meeting is we didn't really have much engagement from the last one. So we might have a few pent up people wanting to go, can I take this to external auditor? And then there's obviously a range of value of your time and your company's time. So could you just generally talk about that? No specific points as that I've got to make. It's just what some members have either said to me over the past year.
Yeah, happy to, Chair. And yeah, I think it's probably a tricky one because I do recognise you've probably not had that engagement. So, you know, we might need to play a little bit of catch up, which is fine. I'm happy to liaise informally within reason, I think is the phrase I would use. We would expect members to exhaust their own governance channels first and go through all the proper processes. But clearly, if you reach a point where you don't feel you are getting the responses that you require, or is there a question around, you know, I appreciate that we are in unprecedented times with where we are in terms of the legislation around potential backstop dates and what that actually means. I think we're still working through what that means. And, you know, clearly that is still in consultation phase. So I do recognise that there is, you know, an element of uncertainty, and that will raise questions. So yeah, within reason, happy informally, and certainly as you as chair, you know, the invite is there if you want you know, an informal meeting, certainly before committees, and that's, you are welcome to contact me through that route. But just being mindful of, you have your own processes to follow and making sure you're going through those first. And equally, it's why your internal auditor is here and your other statutory officers are here as well.
Thank you very much. Before, any other questions at all? No? Okay. Well, that's the note. So Melise, thanks for those questions as well on the pension side, because I think I was certainly feeling the frustration sometimes. You're accountable for something but not responsible for something, which can be the worst of all worlds. And you guys, when you're auditing, obviously have to make us aware. And how do we enact that change? Sometimes throwing light on it is the greatest transparency ever. So thanks for the questions, Melise. Okay, so this is to note, so we'll move on. But Helen, thanks very much. You're more than welcome to stay for the rest of the audit and standards, which it's coming up to 2 more agenda items. I don't think there is any urgent business. If you want to stay, if you do want to head off, you're more than welcome to as well.
No, I should be staying because it does inform our value for money conclusion. So it's always useful to see the debate.
Thank you very much. Okay, item 7, Clive. So this is the annual standards update. Before Clive arrived at NBC, we did have Alison, who was our monitoring officer at the time. So, Clive, I hope Alison did give you a good handover. So, but if there are any questions, bear that in mind that he might need to consult something else as it was with Alison before. And equally, from what members have said of this committee have said, some items we might want to either take offline. We've talked about how we'd like to see standards operate, and obviously we've got the Constitution Working Group working with those as well. So Clive, over to yourself.
Thank you, Chair. I know you've alluded to it, but I'd obviously reinforce the point that this is not about any individual standards cases, and it's not the appropriate forum to address those. So I'm looking at or I'm referring to the scheme overall and activity during the last 12 months. I'm sure that members are all aware of it, but again, it's perhaps worth me reminding them we have to have a code of conduct. Parish councils within our area also have to have a code of conduct, but we are responsible as an authority for not just our own allegations of breaches, but for those allegations made against parish members. So there will be the figures will refer to both our own complaints and those of parishes. The last or the previous 2 years figures are included for some form of comparison. And if members want to refer to part 5 or paragraph 5, we have had an increase in. I've stated in the body report we had an increase. A decrease, which should actually say an increase, because we've had we've had complaints against a greater number of members, but those have come from, some of those come from similar individuals. This year, each of the complaints came from a member of the public rather than other members. So there was no reports of allegations made by members of the authority or of parish councils against other members of the authorities, but they were all made by individuals who were effectively members of the public who had issues or perceived issues regarding behaviour of members. I'd like to refer you to paragraph 5.13 in the table that appears there, because I think that can be slightly confusing. Bearing in mind we've had allegations, sorry, on page
115.
115, that's right, yes. We've had complaints against 6 members, but as you'll see, there's 20 different allegations, and the reason for that is that those complainants have ticked, effectively gone through an exercise of just ticking boxes saying, I think this breaches everything, if I can put it in simple terms. We're looking at a single item of conduct alleged by individuals, but they are trying to say that that breaches multiple provisions of the code. Now, whether it does or not is another matter, but it's a quirk of the reporting process we use. We identify each individual component of the code, and then we explain how many times there's been an allegation that one of those components has been breached. So when you look at the numbers, it does look really distorted because you've got 20 separate allegations of breaches of code, but they are relating to just 6 complaints regarding members. And as I say, they're multiple allegations, if that's the way to describe it. In terms of progress in the current year, we have currently no concluded investigations. It's perhaps the best way to describe it. We are at the preliminary stages with allegations. We are waiting for clarification from some complainants because they've not been able to, despite alleging very broad number of breaches, some of them being very much less clear, saying exactly how they believed those breaches have occurred. And so we are seeking some clarification from them, and we are also awaiting the views of the independent persons on certain matters. So we're not at a stage yet where we can say whether these will be progressed to formal investigation. It's worth mentioning training. We have carried out training over the last couple of years. Of course, though, we've had quite a few changes in membership and arrangements within the groups, within the council. And I think it would be very worthwhile for members to receive further training. It would be offered to all members. Obviously, it's available to take it if they wish. I think the best time to do that perhaps would be after the annual meeting in May, when appointments to committees have been made again. We're not anticipating, obviously, changes in membership of the council per se, but obviously it would be a good time to take stock and ensure that this training is provided as much as a refresher as anything else. But I really do want to sort of embed the changes that were made to this scheme for dealing with complaints in November 2022, just so that all members are fully aware of that. So I think that would be perhaps one of the focuses of that training. So, Chair, that's an overview of the report, but happy to take any questions from yourself or other members.
Thank you, Clive. I think we've said as a committee for the year, certainly on training is important, and I did James Mason and myself did speak with Alison at one of our briefings about having some mock kind of training sessions of how a subcommittee would work, what's expected from the member and the decision maker, the process, how that would work, and also the support that is available to the subject member as well. But I know the code of conduct, that's probably to be delivered to all members, but obviously anyone who is on the Audit and Standards Committee, because there has been concerns raised on this panel, but previously as well, that some members have had no training whatsoever. And unless you've engaged in a legal process or a quasi-judicial type process, or even if you've worked in some kind of disciplinary process in a workplace environment, it's very difficult to understand what's incumbent on yourself of how to handle it, the process, and what's placed on you, because it's of great responsibility. Equally, as we've said before, we would want the process to be as robust as possible for the protection and the not only for the complainant and anyone who interacts with the process, but equally the subject member as well. And it shouldn't favour one or the other. It should be completely fair and impartial. And just on commentary of the figures, it looks here is obviously if we go back, a lot of the time there's no breach of the code, but equally there's some outcomes to be determined. Just a question in whether the outcome to be determined, not mentioning any specific cases, and I don't know about those specific cases, but with 2223, why is that still on? And in terms of if someone is subject to a complaint, obviously the longer it goes on, it puts that particular person into a difficult process because it's always ongoing, and they probably feel that they're under scrutiny all the time. And that's also what I think some people may perceive as unfair on the subject member. So where it says 2022-23, we're in now 23-24, nearly in 24-25. The two outcomes to be determined, and I don't believe we've even touched on a standards complaint or a subcommittee. Without going into those specific cases, why are some taking that long to get to any further, or what, or even if you're not going to talk about a specific case, but why could that end up happening that way?
Chair, there's actually a very simple answer to that. I've just realised now you've raised it that when I copied the table over, I didn't amend that figure.
Oh, so they're close.
So yes, they are.
Oh,
So
well, there you go. We do scrutinise these reports, but okay. So that's so basically, so we've got from just if for members' point of view for for the table that is in 5.2 on page 116. If I'm correct, Clive, we've got the table where 2021, 2022, 2023, 2023. So the outcome to be determined, should that be in no breach of the code? So that goes from 2 to 0, and no breach of the code goes 3 to 5. Is that correct?
yes.
Right. Okay. So we've got no breach of code across that panel should be read 12, 5, and then 0. And for outcome to be determined, that should read 0, 0, 3. Okay. That's Ian.
Yeah, just on that same set of figures, looking at the table in 512, there are actually 4 complaints received in year 2023, 2024, but only 3 outcomes. It to me, it looks like there's one missing somewhere.
That should be 4 because we had another complaint received when this was drafted, and I updated the top table, not the bottom table. So that's 4.
Any other quick, Mike?
I mean, it's also about timescales, and I understand what the monitoring officer has explained regarding the need to just modify these figures. But I think it would be useful without getting into any specifics whatsoever, of course, to have an indication of when complaints have been lodged, so we can have an idea of what timescales are being involved in the process.
Clive, I'll let you, because that might be multifaceted answer, I presume, depending on either the complexity of the complaint, the frivolity of the complaint, depending on where that goes. Over to you.
I mean, it can certainly be included for future reports, but it will be subjective because, you know, for example, a complaint which is very clearly not within scope, because that's the thing, we have to include a complaint, whether or not it actually meets the test in the code is another matter. So one that is very clearly not within scope could be concluded within a week or something like that. Whereas if, as I referred to earlier, we're asking for further information to clarify a complaint, the complainant, despite one of them, despite several requests, has still not really come up with a sufficient answer. And obviously there will be a cut-off point when you'll just have to say, well, that shows no evidence. But even that preliminary stage can be prolonged. But when you end up in a formal investigative process, then, you know, you can end up with these lasting quite a significant portion of time. So perhaps for reporting purposes, we could have a table which breaks down at what's now, hold on, let's go back to it. The outcomes of complaints, perhaps another line there where we say the time taken, we could add that in, and that would be indicative. And again, I wouldn't suggest we go into huge detail, but it could say that it went through perhaps, you know, just because it's been dismissed at the early stage, that it was only a few weeks, or whether it went through a formal investigation. We could just give a bit more detail around that. But obviously we don't want to do anything which gives away or risks giving away details of individual cases. So yeah, I'd be happy to add that in.
I mean, that's fine. I think it's just, you know, it enables us as a committee to reach a judgment whether we should be asking the question. So, you know, if there's a complaint that says this has been ongoing for 15 months, that would attract my attention, whereas one that's been ongoing for 3 months probably would not. I think it just helps us hone in on what might be seen as, and then of course, the explanations, you know, as to why something has taken so long may well be along the lines that the monitoring office has suggested, that there are complexities or issues around it that have inhibited its progress. But it just enables us to know when it's appropriate to probe a bit deeper.
Just on that, I'll bring you in it after this, Ian, is there can be times where it's the response to a particular complaint. Once it's come in, the subject member should be given a reasonable period of time to respond to it, which I think from a review has highlighted sometimes members may not have had a particular reasonable time to have responded to it. And so I think those controls are in place now of the response time. So it can actually add building blocks into a process from when a complaint goes in all the way through, which I think probably that's why I say it depends how it comes in as well, I suppose, and as well. But Ian, over to you.
Yeah, I think actually I think Councillor Brown answered the question I was going to ask. I was going to ask if we would differentiate between elapsed time between a complaint coming in and it being resolved, and the actual amount of time and effort that we've spent doing it, because the two are never the same. The elapsed time may be months, but the actual time spent may be just a few days. And I was trying to wrestle in my own mind with which of the times would we be reporting on, and it sounds like for now at least elapsed time is where we go. And even if if there are 4 cases, the average elapsed time is 6 months. That would it would give us a kind of a rough guide to start with.
Yeah, I think a summary could be useful, because I think that for a particular case you could without giving away details of the case, you could quite easily say, well, this was resolved at the first stage, for example. However, it took 5 weeks to get the information, or in that case, not get the information from the complainant, which would substantiate a breach. So I think that's probably about as far as we can go. But for matters that are dealt with easily, but I think it become more apparent that if we were having formal hearings, etc., where members may sit for a day on a matter, first there'd be some knowledge of that anyway for committee, because members would be involved in that. But then it would be it would perhaps in some cases be harder to go into fine detail, because to get to that stage of the hearing, it could have been days and days of work. So we wouldn't necessarily explain in this type of report each step of the way, because you'd be talking about a particular case, and you'd have to put no detail. You'd have to put no detail of the issues, because this isn't this isn't the forum for it. So having a list of sent email to person, got a statement in, you could have quite a lengthy narrative which explains time taken, but doesn't actually make much sense, because there's no it's quantitative, because it says we've taken this much time, but it doesn't say any detail about what those steps are and why they took time.
Yeah, I think
so again, it wouldn't necessarily answer the questions.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think once once I understand, if you like, the average time to get to a particular resolution, then those cases that are significantly over and above that average time, they're the ones that would concern me. The ones that are significantly under, great. The ones that are significantly over, and I recognise there'll be a bell curve type distribution. It's the ones at the right hand side of that bell curve that are taking an exceptional amount compared to the average that I think I'd be more interested in.
From listening to either someone who's made a complaint and then they felt that the council took a while to get back to them, like you say, is the complaint valid, for example? Or a complaint's in, and I think there is steps of a response is expected within 14 days, or I'm just picking figures out the air there. But what it has to be any process has to be absolutely fair to the complainant as well as the subject member, and that's going to be the paramount part. But equally, if there's something where if the complainant has made the complaint and then they're not hearing anything, the council, I think, has to regularly, and I think they do, don't they, Clive? I think that was one of the recommendations. They have to keep going back and saying, and keeping them informed, but equally on the other side for the subject member, have to keep them informed on a regular basis. And I think I'm not saying ticking boxes because I don't like that particular word, but it has to be where both sides know what's happening. You could probably put it in better language than I'm trying to.
Oh yeah, I mean that's something we would usually do, and say I think that was picked up in the 2022 amendments, and so yeah, that's definitely part of it. So no one should be unaware of what's happening, if that makes sense. But again, there may be I suppose disproportionate delays where something, if you're waiting for a response, the interest of fairness may dictate that you allow someone slightly longer to submit a response. So there still may be distortion to any targets based on that, because you have to be very wary of a simple like a draconian time cutoff, where you measure it purely on time, whereas if someone's circumstances were such that they couldn't respond at a particular time, through illness or something like that, then you'd have to be fair to them and give them a little longer. So you'd keep the parties updated, but again, that may cause a distortion, because something that should take 2 weeks has taken 6 weeks, but in the circumstances it was appropriate because the individual, for example, was unwell, out of the country, whatever it may be.
That's noted. Okay, item 8. So Dawn, you've been waiting very patiently. So I won't. It's just past 8 o'clock. So over to you.
Thanks, Chair. So this is your biannual report on risk management, and you had your annual report last September. It provides an update on activities since the last report, and also an update on the position regarding the strategic risk register following its review by the leadership team. There are some new risks that have been added to the strategic risk register, these being the implementation of food waste collection, the regulatory change in housing, which we've already spoken about this evening, capacity to respond to a major incident, and also the capacity to deliver against the new vision and corporate delivery plan. 2 risks have been removed from the register, so it's not just about adding risks, and they're as a result of actions taken to mitigate those, and these are GDPR, and paragraph 5.9 should actually state recommendations have now been implemented, not been implemented, which is why that risk has been removed from the strategic risk register, and also the cost of living. And the risks relating to future leisure provision and capacity to deliver services and projects is also reduced, although they do remain on that strategic risk register. And what that demonstrates by the removal of those risks and also the downgrading of others as a result of actions taken is it does demonstrate that we've got a culture of risk awareness and mitigation, and also a grip on those risk management actions. You'll also note as well, since the last report, that we've had a new e-learning package, and that's been launched for staff on risk management, so that we can do regular training. Opportunities there are available to new staff and existing staff that want a refresher. Thank you.
Just a quick question where it says failure to deliver the MMDR in full or in part. Is that referring to what's being delivered at the moment, the north and east and leg, or is it including the southern part, which has recently raised debate in the Melton Times following the additional government money? So that's, I just want to understand where it says in full or in part, or is it just what's being delivered at the moment?
Yeah, it's the whole scheme, because otherwise what you'll have is just part of that, and that won't alleviate fully that traffic issue. So obviously we've still got that issue, haven't we, with the south and the east, if I'm getting that right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have to say, I know a lot of members who've been elected in May 2023, and I know members who were elected before that have campaigned quite strongly for government to fund more of the southern part. And while I think there's some debate on that, it was very much welcome that central government has pumped more money into Leicestershire that way, which is something I think everyone can agree on. I hope, on a personal level, I hope the south is funded from that, because that will obviously unlock a lot of value, not only for housing, which we've discussed it in the audit plans earlier, and homelessness and various other things, but also economic generation, not just for Melton, but for Leicestershire as well. And that also may unlock school places, which I know a lot of members are raising outside of the Audit Standards Committee, but I know a lot of members are raising school places as well, which their residents are raising. So I'll leave this open to members if there's any questions on this one. We've debated lots of the points already, but Mike, it's always good to have a comment.
And forgive me in asking this question, because I should have looked back at the previous risk rating for the future leisure provision. But obviously after the success, pretty much, as I understand it, of securing the continuation of a new contract for leisure provision. What was it reduced from? What was it before it was reduced to 12?
Does it say, I'm just having a look in the report, whether it actually comments in there, otherwise I'd have to go back and open up the previous risk register. Just having a quick look. Sorry, it's scrolling incredibly slowly. No, it doesn't say in the report, does it? I can email that over to you if you want outside the meeting rather than me try and look that up now. If that, yeah.
I'm just, it's a bit disappointed to see it's still at 12.
Yeah, I mean, it's still, I think we had quite a lot of debate about whether it should actually stay in. And I think going back to the debate we had before the meeting about how long some of these reports take, we go through a process and then it's quality assured. And I think until it's actually delivered and it's there on site, I think that's why it's remained on there. So it's a bit of a caution there, really, that until the contract's signed, which I know is being done this week, something could potentially happen.
No, so that's noted. Any urgent business? There is no urgent business, but what I would like to do just before I close the meeting, won't take 2 seconds. Oh, unless do you want to say something, Steve? If you want to. Well, I'll just. Yeah, I was just going to thank the committee for this civic year for all the work that it's done on the Audit and Standards Committee. Obviously, partway through welcoming Clive to the committee, welcoming Helen now to this team, but also my thanks goes to Dawn and Rachel, and then obviously the democratic services and what Adam's done. So we've had some feedback, Adam. I think Dawn and Rachel will feed that back to democratic services. So I think they give you a 5 out of 5 rating. So thanks for democratic services to supporting audit and standards. And equally is I've been really impressed with how everybody has interacted on the committee. I'd like to thank my vice chair, James Mason, who sadly couldn't be here. He's got far better things to be doing. I think he's some business he's attending to, but I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, I'd like to thank James, and he stepped into the chair once while I couldn't be here. So looking forward to the next civic year, I think, whenever that is. And those who are on this committee, I think we've left it in a really good position as well, and look forward to it carrying on. Steve, over to you if you're going to close up.
Yeah, just a quick one. I think it's a bit rude, and I've got to say this, right? When people's doing reports, this is a very important committee, and you got people on the phones texting, and that I don't agree with it. I think it's disgusting.
So thanks for that, Steve. Without knowing what anybody particularly was doing, so one, I haven't got. So this is just myself. So I would have contacted on my particular.
Chair, it's happened tonight, Chair.
No, I know, yeah.
Clive was doing a meeting, debating on the complaints. You got 3 members over there on phones not listening. I think it's rude for the committee.
Okay, so while it's noted, just from my own point of view, is sometimes I get my papers through. Okay, so it's noted. Okay. All right, thank you very much, Steve, for that. So I will close the meeting tonight, and thanks everybody for their time as well. So the meeting is closed at whatever time it is, but it says 2023, which it's not that time. 11 minutes past. Thank you very much.